NASCAR heads to an aging Atlanta Motor Speedway this weekend. Handling, execution will all be tested. Let's break it down. I'm now joined by the one and only Dale Tanhart, ready to talk a little Atlanta Motor Speedway. It was good running into you at Daytona this weekend. Dale, how'd you do in those wheelbarrow races? I saw you over there hanging with that crowd. Did you compete? Did you participate?
Yeah, that was a great time to catch me. It was great to see you too, and I hope you had a great time down in Daytona. I hope the fans did as well to get the season kicked off. But 1-0 retired in the wheelbarrow races. We'll consider, unlike Carl Edwards, we'll consider coming out of retirement next year when we get back there, if we come back there. So, yeah,
undefeated.
I entered one race, won it, left, and we retire 1-0 in the Wheelbarrow World Championship.
Wow, the mysterious legend of Dale Tanhart will be discussed throughout those campsites until next February, it sounds like. Well, Dale, a good chance to chat with you today about Atlanta. We open up the year with back-to-back super speedways that have two very different characteristics. Atlanta, it's a 1.5-mile track, shorter straightaways, tighter radius around the corners. I've noticed watching highlights and clips from the past couple of years, you get a little more space between the cars in the draft at Atlanta. Handling, for sure, will come into play a bit more. The talk this week has been about how Daytona has become more luck than skill at the end. Bumper cars leading to big crashes. You just have to survive. That hasn't really been the case as much at Atlanta since the reconfiguration. So I just want to get your opinion. Fans are going to tune into Atlanta this week, see a big pack still, but the racing is actually going to look a little different than the Daytona 500. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, as a betting man, I actually have come to like Atlanta a little bit more than Daytona. And, I think the racing at Daytona has certainly improved in the Gen 7 era. We still have the basic problems that we all vent about on social media. But, at the end of the day, there's more predictability at Atlanta. And just the winners list would tell you that. And when you look at Daytona and Atlanta week to week, there is a big difference in the racing because of kind of what you already touched on. There seems to be more space between the cars, typically, and maybe not every time, but we've seen dominant race cars that were clearly better than other race cars in the field. Like Chase Elliott 2022 had a rocket ship. We've seen Joey Logano have rocket ships. There's more likelihood for teammate alliances like we saw fall of 2023. It was Penske versus Trackhouse. You have less options at Atlanta. Even though the racing is good, there's less options because the racetrack is just smaller. And I think when you put these drivers in these cars with fewer options, they're going to have fewer wrecks as well. So it's kind of funny how the irony of this has played out. As Atlanta went through the transformation with the reconfiguration to a drafting style racetrack, we all hated it, right? I mean, every traditionalist couldn't stand the idea of it. And now, partially because of the race car, we've come to kind of like Atlanta maybe a little bit more than Daytona and Talladega, just because the quality of racing is better. The track's wearing quickly. Seems like the more and more the track wears with this car and this package, it just works at Atlanta in the Cup Series. I think Xfinity and Trucks have a little bit of work to do. They seem better at Daytona and Talladega than Atlanta. But the Cup Series, for whatever reasons, it seems to put on a show at Atlanta, and it's a little bit more predictable and tame relative to Daytona.
Yeah, like we can actually point to trends at Atlanta. You mentioned dominant cars. Austin Cindric last year led, I think, 90 laps in one of the Atlanta races. Like, you look at the past Atlanta winners since the reconfiguration. You have William Byron twice. That's Hendrick Motorsports, plus Chase Elliott you mentioned. You have two Joey Logano wins. Of course, Team Penske, great at the super speedway type tracks. Daniel Suarez last year in the iconic finish you have behind you is probably the lone exception. But even Daniel, we were talking earlier before we recorded, has finished second, first, second his last three Atlanta races. So we may see that as kind of random. It's not. Daniel Suarez is always good at Atlanta for some reason. So to your point, unlike Daytona and Talladega, where we've seen the Harrison Burtons and Austin Dillons and Ricky Stenhouses shock the world, Atlanta typically lends itself to the best drivers and teams traditionally. I want to ask you about one of those traditionally great teams, Team Penske. Team Penske dominated at Daytona once again. Blaney led 23 laps. Logano led 43. Cindric led 59. They swept the first two stages, yet none of them finished the race in the top five. I want to give you this crazy stat about Joey Logano. Last season, he finished 32nd, 28th, 19th, 31st, 33rd, and first in the 6 drafting races. It's all or nothing with Joey Logano. What's your assessment of Team Penske coming into this weekend? Can they finally seal the deal?
Well, when we talk about Joey Logano, I mean, your statistics are a consequence of like the moves he made last week at Daytona, right? So, Joey Logano is like 50%. He's like 50-50 on both sides of the spectrum. 50%, he's a fantastic super speedway racer with a strong IQ. He's won the Daytona 500. He's won at Talladega. He's won at Atlanta twice in the reconfiguration. And then the other 50% is just crazy moves that gets himself and other drivers wrecked. So when you talk about Joey, I mean, the stats speak for themselves, but I would bet that most of those DNFs, he's probably running close to the front whenever things go wrong. But yeah, I mean, one thing that doesn't change between Daytona, Talladega, and Atlanta is Team Penske dominance. I mean, they just have it figured out from a speed standpoint, strategy standpoint, and their drivers are just fantastic in the draft overall. And Austin Cindric is a great talking point because he finally got the respect he deserves, I feel like, from the sports books. When last week, Daytona 500, 24-1 is what I had him to win it. And this week, he opens up everywhere at 12-1. And wow. I've never seen Austin Cindric open up that low towards the favorite category in my life. And he deserves it because he kind of, this is going to get blown out of proportion, but he kind of reminds me of Dale Earnhardt Jr. in how he likes to control the race no matter what. Like, he has that attitude of, I want to be leading at all times, no matter what. We see it time and time and again. That 2-car, ever since Austin Cindric took over in 2022, I mean, he has had many, many opportunities to win and leading when it matters, running up front when it matters. He wins stages. He leads laps. I mean, he really is spectacular in the draft. And then we got to talk about Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney is the king of bad luck when being in a good position. Like his teammate Joey Logano, a lot of times causes the wrecks. Ryan Blaney rarely causes any of the wrecks that he ends up getting caught up in. Exhibit A, Daytona 500 last week, running by himself on the bottom and just gets hooked, right? So Ryan Blaney's fantastic. He's got the best average finish since the reconfiguration at Atlanta in 2022. He's been spectacular here, and I'm waiting for him to park it in the victory lane. But there's one thing for certain, we talk about the difference between Daytona and Atlanta. Don't expect any differences with Team Penske. They're going to be up there at the front, trying to win stages, trying to lead laps, and being aggressive all day long.
I wholeheartedly agree. And you're right. Ryan Blaney is overdue for another super speedway win. And on the note of Austin Cindric, that 2022 Daytona 500 win is looking less and less fluky by the year. I think Cindric led more laps at super speedways last season than anyone in the Cup Series. So to your point, he does like to control these races, and he knows how to control these races until something out of his control happens on the last lap of the Daytona 500 we saw last week.
I'm not saying he's Dale Jr., everybody. Just make sure we're clear on that.
Yeah, it's a comparison. You're giving him a compliment. That you're paying him, right. I think, a worthy compliment. Well, I do want to ask about a Hendrick Motorsports Chevy, William Byron. At some point, is it luck or is there skill involved? He has 4 drafting track wins in the next-gen era, double the next best driver, 2 Daytona 500s. He has 2 Atlanta wins as well, though it is worth noting his second Atlanta win was a rain-shortened race. He's led a lot of laps here in the next-gen car, 174. So William Byron, I don't know if he's listed as the favorite. I imagine he's up there. What do you think of Byron's opportunity to go back-to-back to begin the new year?
Would be the first time since someone you're very familiar with. Back in 2009, Matt Kenseth was the last driver to win the season opener and the second race, points races of the season.
He missed the playoffs that year. It was before winning your in. So maybe a bad omen in some ways for William Byron. But yes, thank you for that stat. I like that.
No, could be. And Jeff Gordon, when he won the 05 Daytona 500, he missed the chase, or as we call them, the playoffs now. So anyway, not to put bad juju on William Byron, but when I talk about my top-ranked super speedway racers, we've already covered 3 of them with Team Penske, right? I throw Brad Keselowski up there. And then I lean to having William Byron in that top 5, but there's an argument to be made that he's number 1 for the reason of how super speedway racing has changed. 5 years ago, I would say the number 1 most important set of attributes to be a winner at a super speedway would be driver IQ, ability in the draft, fast race car, aggression, right? And as years have gone by, I would flip that to be number 2 because number 1 is survival. It really is. I mean, number one is survival. And when you look at William Byron's statistics over his last 10, 11 super speedway races, he is the best at surviving. And if you survive, that is the most important quality. That is the most important attribute to being at the front of these races. I mean, he's running eighth at the last, coming to the white flag, seventh or eighth, ends up winning because he survived. There was 4 or 5 guys that weren't involved in a wreck the entire night. Look, William Byron has the skill. He's got fantastic driver IQ, great equipment, a good balance in aggression and smarts. But he's kind of got this luck factor that no one else has. And it's certainly not to take away from his abilities. He's super talented. He's won a bunch of these races. He's now a 2-time Daytona 500 winner. He's won twice at Atlanta, as you referenced earlier. And he's had runner-ups at Talladega. The guy is a great super speedway racer, but he truly has mastered this survival thing, being right place, right time, better than anybody in the NASCAR Cup Series. So, he's in my top 5. He's capable of being number one because he's kind of got, as Kevin Harvick famously said to another Hendrick driver, 10, 15 years ago, he's kind of got this golden horseshoe type of thing going on. So William Byron, man, it's amazing to see, really. And when you look at the stat book, it's even more amazing when you're like, whoa, like all these crazy races in the Gen 7 era, he was in the top 10. He was in the top 5. He was leading laps. It's astounding to see how he gets through chaos and has emerged as one of the top super speedway racers. So sports books kind of differentiate here. Few of them have him as a co-favorite. Some have him in that range around Daniel Suarez, Chase Elliott-ish. So I think William Byron, just don't be surprised if he finds a way to be there at the end this Sunday.
As the kids say, he's got plot armor at super speedways, it seems. We'll see if that luck sticks with him for another week here at Atlanta. Dale, we'll wrap up with this. It is a super speedway style race. While, as we've seen, Hendrick, Penske typically run up front and win these races in particular, we have seen some surprises. Daniel Suarez, you don't consider him a top 5, top 10 threat everywhere. He is at Atlanta. Corey LaJoie a few years back gave Chase Elliott a run for his money at the end of this race. So who's a good underdog pick that maybe you think folks are sleeping on this weekend?
Yeah, it's tough to call Daniel Suarez an underdog with how good he's been here, as you've referenced already. And Trackhouse has been good. I'd go with Ross Chastain, too. Ross Chastain, not just at Atlanta, but other super speedways, has done a pretty good job. When he doesn't get involved in accidents that are typically not his doing, like last week, he finds a way to be there at the end. And Atlanta, he's been very, very good at that. Last fall, he was pushing Daniel Suarez potentially to a win. He's run second here before. He's had top 3s, been in good positions, not just here, but Talladega as well, where he won at spring of 2022. And he was in position to win the Daytona 500 last year. So, Ross Chastain's kind of been unlucky on the getting involved in wrecks deal, opposite of William Byron, but he does a good job at finding a way to be close to the front at the end of these races. At least when he survives, he's in the fight. He's in the argument. And I think Ross Chastain is a guy, as a betting man, 25 to 1-ish. I kind of like that. Christopher Bell, I think, is a guy that's being slept on, who's had very good progression at super speedways over the past couple of years. We've seen him at Daytona now twice in the last 2 Daytona races, the one where Harrison Burton won last fall and in the Daytona 500, in potential winning positions. Remember, he was pushing Kyle Busch on that bottom lane when Harrison Burton went around the outside. And in the Daytona 500, what are we at? 4 laps to go, and he gets wrecked from the outside lane leading it. Christopher Bell has made serious strides as a super speedway racer. Remember the dual race he won last year as well. Yep. And when you look at Atlanta, he's got a couple top 5 finishes and should have had another one, but he got disqualified when he got forced below that red line on the backstretch spring of 2022. So I think Christopher Bell, you may look at the stat sheet and be like not impressed, but the eye test tells me he's getting better, and he's finding himself in more and more potential winning positions. And one more underdog, a true underdog I will go with, is Corey LaJoie. Corey LaJoie does deserve a lot of credit for how he raced last week. It was shaping up to be a legacy run. And, we've seen him do well at Daytona. We've seen him have some glimpses at Talladega, but Atlanta is where he's had the best opportunity to win. So I think Corey LaJoie proved that in his new role in the Cup Series, he can figure it out. And he also proved that his car is good. His car was competitive, and and we'll see more. We'll see how that unfolds more this weekend, because the handling does matter a little bit more than Daytona. But Rick Ware has brought some decent race cars, good enough race cars to compete at Atlanta in the past. So with Corey LaJoie, I think he'll be a factor again if he stays out of trouble.
Back to what you said about Christopher Bell a moment ago, those are some really good observations, because you're right. The eye test says he has improved at drafting tracks. I worry about Toyota, though. I feel like they fooled me last weekend at Daytona with how good they were on Wednesday night, and then they, basically swept the duels. I was ready to say, all right, this is the year Toyota finally runs with the Penske guys, and then they just didn't really. And I know that Atlanta last summer, I think Ty Gibbs was the only Toyota to lead laps in the summer race at Atlanta. So I'm worried about Toyota, but I like your observation about Bell. He might be, outside of Hamlin, perhaps, might be the Toyota that I'd have the most confidence in. Good stuff, Dale. Really appreciate you stopping by this morning. Where can folks find more of your work? YouTube, I know you stream. Where can people find more from Dale Tanhart?
Yeah, no, thanks. Obviously, love to be back here. But it's just Dale Tanhart, all social media platforms. The iRacing live streams are on Kick. YouTube here is where I give more informal analysis, more betting centered for all NASCAR National Series racing. Pretty easy to find me, I feel like, but it's always a pleasure to come on here and talk NASCAR racing and talk about, gets me a little bit excited, early in the week, right? Gets you a little bit more pumped up when you start having these conversations about how the weekend's going to look. And it's a triple header weekend with Trucks, Xfinity, and Cup. So very excited and very happy to be back here on Out of the Groove.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you being here. We'll have you on again, I'm sure, several times throughout the season. Have a good weekend, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, man. You too.